Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm Avi Melamed, founder and host of the Briefing Room. Thank you for joining our session today. Our session today is Voices from Iran. Our guest today is Miss Negar Mojtahedi, and I will be more than honored to introduce Negar soon. Just before we start, I want to remind you all, this session totally is about 1 hour. My interview and discussion with our guest speaker will be for about 30 minutes, followed by questions and answers to be managed by ITME Educational Director, Mr. Josh Goldberg. I would like to ask you, please, to post your questions at the Q&A post. Thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, this session today of ITME Briefing Room, Voices from Iran, is very honored to host our guest speaker, Miss Negar Mojtahedi. With your permission, I will shortly introduce her. Ms. Negar Mojtahedi is a multi-platform journalist with Iran International English, where she hosts the weekly podcast and television program I for Iran, featuring compelling interviews, expert analysis, and high-impact investigation into the latest development in and around Iran. She is an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose first documentary, My Dream Goes All the Way to Iran, offers a powerful portrait of the Iranian expatriate experience, an immigrant community often misunderstood and misrepresented. Her work also has been recognized internationally. She received the Transatlantic Leadership News Network Freedoms of the Media Award for Excellence in International Reporting in Washington, D.C., honoring both her work on I for Iran and her investigative reporting for Iran International. Above all, Negar believes the heart of every story is emotion. Negar, thank you for joining this ITME session of the Briefing Room. We are very honored to have you with us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, Negar, as always, when we are honored to have guest speakers from the region, like as yourself, we would like first to hear a little bit about your personal story. Please share with us.
So I was born in Canada, and the reason for that is that my family was essentially expelled out of Iran. They had to flee at the time of the 1979 revolution. We had a mix of, executions in the family, murders, assassinations, and we had what we call in Farsi, my family became mosadere, which means that everything was confiscated from my family. So essentially they lost everything. And that's when my family had gone to the UK, to France, to all over Europe until they settled in Canada and had me. And I grew up hearing these stories. Even my grandparents' next door neighbors were relatives of Farah Diba, who's the Empress of Iran. The people who lived across the street from me also had a very similar story. So I just grew up hearing these stories constantly. And I knew that I wanted to do something always to help Iran and to help the Iranian people, which has led me down the path that I am in today.
Yes, and indeed, in your work, you have been constantly having what we call the finger on the pulse in the context of Iran. But there is something very significant to notice talking about your work as a journalist, as a person that has been devoting your life to express and echo voices of the people of Iran. And that is, of course, the basic fact that under the Mullah regime who came to power in 1979, since then, Iran has been under very suffocating censorship, particularly in the last couple of years. We all know that internet has been blocked quite often in Iran. More than that, we know that people have been executed for using external capacities to try to connect to the world. So the most immediate question that I have in mind is, how do you communicate with the people in Iran?
It's very difficult. It's very limited to a certain extent. So there are certain contacts that I have inside Iran who are now able to use their landline, which is very expensive, but they're able to call me, especially when they want to pass along information, but I'm not able to call them. And then, of course, we do have our contacts who do have Starlink, which, as you mentioned, there was a 40-year-old father of two who was executed recently for owning it. So they definitely are cracking down. It is a dangerous situation there. But those individuals who have Starlink then connect us to other individuals who don't and will check in on people, give us updates. There are people who also have VPNs as well. And one thing that I know people that are looking in terms of towards the future is something called direct to cell, which hasn't happened yet in Iran, but they're hoping that's something that could happen in the near future where you can just connect direct to a satellite.
I see. So it's kind of like, an enormously challenging situation and reality when you are trying in your work professionally to not only to extract the information, but also try to come up with a picture, trying to, as much as possible, reflect the inside situation in Iran in the most authentic way. We're looking at a major nation, 90 million people. We're looking at an enormously, proud civilization that gave so much to mankind. And we are looking at a state that has been, unfortunately, in a very gloomy reality for many decades now under the rule of the Mullah regime. And I think that now, when everyone is looking at this geopolitical story, the big story, the weapons and the oil and the blockade, and right now, as we are talking, there are clouds of storm gathering just right in the horizon. They are talking about basically possibly resuming the war. It's very essential right now at this moment to bring those voices from within. It's very significant to bring those voices. So please share with us what is going on with the Iranian people. What do they say? How do they feel? What do they look at? How do they look at the reality and the future ahead?
And I want to thank you, Avi, and your team for that opportunity because the one thing that people inside Iran and outside of Iran find so disheartening is the fact that the news cycle has been obsessed with hormones, for example, and not even mentioning the fact that, whether there's war or there's not war, whether there's talks or there's not talks, the one thing that remains consistent inside Iran is executions, is hangings, is the fact that people are being killed daily, and the voices and the stories of the people of Iran and the human rights abuses don't seem to take center stage. It seems to be all this political issues that really strips the humanity out of the situation at large. So I just wanted to take a step back before we get into the individual stories, is really looking at the situation in Iran, how people are describing it inside Iran in a general sense. And that is, it's hard to describe it because it's unlike anything that I can really comprehend. And it's beyond bad. It's almost unreal. It's weird in some ways to really grasp what is happening. I mean, it's been 5 months in total since January. And in that short period of time, we've had massive protests that basically tried to overthrow this regime and bring about a democratic transition. We've had a massive crackdown, which is the biggest massacre in the world's modern history, with tens of thousands of people being killed. Then you've got the war. Then you've got this internet blockade that you mentioned, and executions happening on a daily basis. And this happened all in the span of 5 months. So how are people even able to absorb any of this? They're still reeling with the trauma of January 8th and 9th. And it happened again in such a short period of time. And people don't realize how much has happened in basically just a few months. And so people are feeling very depressed. There's this one 17-year-old boy named Mani that we spoke to at Iran International. He took part in the January protests, but now he would think twice about rejoining any kind of protest because he was hoping for a swift change. And what he describes the mood in Iran right now is, it's an interesting term. He called it suspended expectation. And what is that? It's this belief in Iran that, yes, this regime is not going to last. This regime will fall, but they just don't know when or how, or are they going to be the ones that are going to bring it down? So it's a concept that's very hard to grasp and even harder to explain because the situation is so unreal. And that's kind of the dominant mood right now for, I would say, this Gen Z generation, so to speak, because they feel that if the US and Israel weren't able to take them down right away, how can they do that? And they saw their friends being killed. They saw family members being severely injured. And they saw all of that, and yet this repressive, brutal regime is still there. You know, we spoke to a young woman by the name of Saba who said, yeah, she feared the bombings from the war. That was a real threat. But at the same time, there was a sense of exhilaration. Every time there was a regime official that would be killed, she would celebrate. And in Iran, a lot of the people were actually having parties with their headphones still on so that the regime wouldn't find out that they've been partying when Khamenei was eliminated, for example. And so there's just a lot of trauma right now where they want this revolution to happen. They don't know if it's going to happen. They don't believe in reform. So they're really looking now for an exit plan. Like, how do I get out of this? And it's a very sad situation overall. It's quite depressing, actually.
Well, Negar, you bring something that, it's kind of like when you think about it, it's kind of like hit you, so to speaking. You basically say something like, look, here is a 90 million people nation that for the last 6 months or so actually has been experiencing a reality that I could think could be summed up to a word which is totally chaotic. You mentioned the uprising of the Iranian, the brutal oppression, and then the war, and then this whole reality that people, as you describe right now, when people are, in a way, seems like to be very depressed. It's kind of like they don't know what's going to be tomorrow. So you mentioned, for example, young people in Iran, which we know for a long period of time, these are people that obviously are for different reasons, are very much resentful of the regime and so on. But what about the middle class, if there is such thing? What about people with families? What about how do they look at this whole situation, particularly when you hear these reports about this dire economic situation?
The situation, they're a little bit more apprehensive because they might have a young child that they're worried about. We spoke to a man by the name of Omid who had started a cafe before the January 8th and 9th uprising. Things were going really well for him. Then when January 8th and 9th happened, he didn't take part in the protest because he had a 2-year-old daughter and they were worried for her safety and what if something happened to them. But he did support the revolutionaries in the sense that like he shut down his business and he happily did it. And he said, I shut down my business in the hopes that things would change. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. So then he opened up his business again, and people weren't showing up. And now he's at the point where he's selling furniture from this cafe that he really spent, time to build up with blood and his own blood and his own sweat. And as a result of that, he's thinking of an exit plan. He told me that he's thinking about going to Turkey or going to Armenia because, again, he just doesn't see. It's like they've been robbed of their future at this point, and they're stuck in some sort of, I don't know, purgatory, if you will. Like they can't go back to the life that they had before January 8th and 9th. Nothing will feel normal after something like that. When you see tens of thousands of people being killed, when you see blood streaming on the streets and melting with the pavement, you're not going to be the same person that you were before that. That wouldn't be normal otherwise. And at the same time, what kind of future are they looking towards? What's happening right now? I mean, it's like from the US perspective, in terms of the policies, it's like Dr. Jekyll, Dr. Hyde. One moment there's war, one moment there's talks, one moment people are meeting in Islamabad. So you're seeing all of this, and maybe it's strategic from the geopolitical sense, maybe it's strategic ambiguity. I don't know. I'm not in the US government, but for the people who are actually experiencing that, it's confusion and it's not knowing what the future holds. So for people like you mentioned who have families, they feel like their future has been disrupted. There's the economic strain, which is very evident. Inflation is so high that Iranians are making jokes inside Iran that the only reason that, there's goods and supplies and there's stocks at the shops is because people just don't have the money to purchase anything. So everything kind of just stands still. So at least they have, dark humor is definitely a coping mechanism for the Iranian people. There's widespread layoffs. The digital economy, because this internet blackout is more than just communication. It's more than just, me being able to connect with people and telling their stories. It's tied to economy. It's tied to what I would refer to as a parallel economy, like do it yourself, DIU economy, where you could be separate from the state. You could sell goods, have shops online. You could provide therapy or psychological services to people who lived outside of Iran who wanted, a native Farsi speaker, for example. So now they've lost all of that. And Tehran is losing its daughters. Tehran is the capital. It's a place that women who may have come from smaller towns or maybe even conservative families were able to move there and be independent. And now they can't survive in their own city. So things are changing rapidly. Instagram, for example, is not just a fun app where you scroll through. It was a shop front for a lot of people. There was a lot of businesses that were being offered, or there was Instagram stars that were making money that can no longer do that as well. So, I mean, for the internet to be shut down for 2 months now they're trying to have this kind of tiered system, which obviously isn't working. I know that the nurses union inside Iran rejected it, saying that you're creating a class tier system and we're not taking part in it, which is quite amazing. But people are finding ways to fight back in that sense. But again, it's this issue of not having a future to look forward to. And so families are quite scared and they're thinking of exit plans at this point because things haven't changed the way that they thought it would change.
Yeah, I think that, but when we talked, you and I talked before, and, you told me all these amazing things and others, one of the most significant things that kind of like came across very powerfully from your inside voices was this sense of like, there is no future. People kind of like saying, we don't really feel there is a future for us in Iran, and people are looking to migrate, actually to live. Now, I know that for Iranian people, this is an enormously painful thing because they are enormously connected to their homeland in many ways. But my question is, to what extent does people really can execute something like that in terms of logistics, administrations, capacities? The rule itself wouldn't enable people to leave Iran?
Avi, I truly believe when there's a will, there's a way. And even in the most dire situations, when you're desperate, you will make things happen. And even with the restrictions right now that the government has placed on people, Iranians are very resilient and they're incredibly smart. And they find ways, whether they, take a car towards the border with Turkey or with Armenia and then go, pay someone and go via land, or they might know somebody outside of Iran who will help them with that. They will find ways when it comes to surviving. But at this point, from the people that, that we've spoken to, we spoke to a young mother of two, and she said, I'm not thinking, her name's Mana, actually, 30-year-old mother, and I'm thinking about daily survival. And daily survival has now overtaken any of my political goals and political aspirations. I just want to get through the day and just get by. And so people are kind of just taking it day to day. So when it comes to that aspiration of trying to leave the country, they will find a way to do it. But again, it's just a matter of going at life day through day through day till you get to that point where you can get there. And believe me, they will when they have the will to do so. And again, are in such a desperate situation, not knowing what this future holds, or that the people have been enduring inside Iran.
I think that this very clear sense of desperation that you are reflecting, many things are fueling that, as one can understand. Obviously, this living for many decades after such an oppressive, brutal regime is isn't it for itself is enough to cause a lot of desperation. But I would say that in a way, I would say even ironically, there has been a pickup in sense of expectations, particularly in the last couple of months, that here comes the change that we were all waiting for, and it's not coming. And so, how do you see the impact of this, I would say, downfall, so to speaking? How do you think it's going to impact, at least in the foreseeable future, the mindset of the Iranian people?
Well, it goes back to that the way that the 17-year-old boy we spoke to, Mani, described it, suspended expectation, where they do believe that these efforts will lead to some sort of change. They just don't know when or how it's going to happen. So it's going to affect the future in terms of how they partake in uprisings. It's going to affect migration, like we talked about. It affects things on a daily level. And when you're thinking about just surviving and getting through the day, your mindset is in a completely different place. And people are very numb. We spoke to this, again, another Gen Z, Hamid, 19 years old. He's serving his mandatory military service, which is conscription. He says that the repression right now, the daily executions, everything that happened in January with the massacre, it doesn't even add necessarily anger or hatred anymore because they have so much built up inside of them. And it's hard to explain, but nothing really feels complete anymore. And there's this sense of numbness for them right now. And I think this goes back to that feeling of depression. How could you not after everything that they've been through? They even haven't had a chance to recover from January 8th and 9th, and then there's a war. And then there's this economic war that's happening. We still don't have a clear picture of how the war has affected steel plants and petrochemical factories, which is a huge marker of Iran's economy. And there's going to be a ripple effect that do affect people in terms of their daily lives. And again, that going back to that, well, if the Americans and the Israelis couldn't get rid of them per se immediately, then what are we going to do? And this feeling of, well, we don't want reform, we want a revolution, but it hasn't happened. So let's just think about it. I think it's just going back to this survivalship, and let's think about this exit plan right now. But again, there's also a sense of people that don't want to lose hope, that don't want us to lose hope for them and want us to keep pushing through. There is still an overall mood of the US and Israel, please finish the job. Please get rid of this regime. So despite everything that they're going through, they still have that goal in mind, that they do want the foreign intervention to just get rid of this regime once and for all. So they are still hopeful, and they do want us to keep fighting for them and to be their voice and to be their advocate. But again, what you go through on your daily life is very different than your hopes, your aspirations, and your dreams.
So, I'm kind of like listening to the last part of what you said. It's very interesting because actually you're saying with all this very dire reality and challenging situation, and basically as you say, it's very clear that the numbness of people is some sort of like a psychological mechanism to defend in such a challenging reality. Yet you say the fire is still there beneath the surface.
Yep.
The fire is still there. And it's like I was kind of like one of the things that you shared, I think it was a couple of months ago, was very interesting. There was a concert of young people playing openly in the streets of Tehran, and girls were walking around with no hijab, and it seems like as if there was this feeling of things are moving in the right direction. Do you think that this is part of this underground fire that continues to burn there, and it's still there?
Yes, and this is their form of rebellion. This is how they revolt, are these young people who are saying no to this Islamic system. And it's, when you see those images, in many ways, people might look at it like, oh, the regime is going in a different direction. Oh, there's been reform. It's not reform. It's the fact that they are not able to control that many people anymore. When when a vast majority of people are walking around without a hijab, what are you going to do, right? You're forced almost to accept this new reality because this regime is desperate. There's a new movie that just came out right now from Iran. There's a woman singing in the movie, which is not allowed. There's a woman, again, who's not wearing a hijab. She's wearing some sort of like hat or something like that. And this is a regime, to me, being desperate. The regime is at its weakest point still, despite the fact that they are still repressive and have control. This is a regime that's falling apart. And the best kind of outcome for the people of Iran is when they start to unravel from within and that there's infighting. And we're seeing infighting now between hardliners themselves, and which is only normal after everything that's happened. This is a kind of factions that would emerge, from the ashes right now, so to speak. And the people of Iran know that, and they know that they have that power. If the people of Iran were not a threat, they wouldn't have gone and killed that many people in basically 2 nights. They did it because they know what a threat they are. And they learned lessons from Syria, if you will, because one of the things they told Bashar al-Assad is, yeah, you didn't kill enough people or you would have stayed in power. That was the lesson that they learned because they were very instrumental in keeping Assad in power during the Arab Spring.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Assad regime that was very oppressive, and then there was a significant component in the story of Syria where at some point, as I called it, the wall of fear was cracking. And I think that we could see that back in Iran as well very clearly, that the wall of fear of the regime was cracking, and maybe following the recent events has been significantly further cracking. To conclude our conversation, right now, um, what do you think the people in the West should really deeply absorb right now when they are thinking about the people of Iran?
You know, that's a great question because when I look at the Western world, when I see the protests happening, hands off Iran, things like that, and I don't actually see Iranians at any of those protests. And I'm thinking to myself, do you not understand what we're going through? For example, I found it really frustrating when I would have people that I knew who come up to me during the war, for example, and say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry for what Trump is doing to your country. Are you okay?" And I'm like, "What? Where's this coming from? And why did none of these folks check in on me during January 8th and 9th? Why did nobody check in on me during the Women Life Freedom Movement? What about the hundreds and thousands of children that this regime has killed?" And yet it didn't seem like anything to them. Only when America and Israel are involved is somehow there a great catastrophe and tragedy happening inside Iran. So I want people to know what the people of Iran want. And the people of Iran are very much pro-American. They're very much pro-Israel, and they want change. They want this regime to go. And I hope that people in the West can start supporting the people of Iran. So, for example, things like advocating for better policy to help with the internet blackout, for example, is one thing. But to come and to give your sympathies and to criticize foreign intervention when that's exactly what the people of Iran were asking for is not only absurd, it's incredibly ignorant.
Hmm. That's a very powerful point to bring as a conclusion of this fascinating discussion. I'm sure that we could have much more issues to talk about, but as always, we would like now to turn to the part of the questions, and I turn to my colleague Josh Goldberg, the Educational Director of ITME. Josh, please take over.
I'm here, Avi.
Okay,
Um,
Josh, thank you.
thank you. Our first question has to do with Negar herself. The question comes from Arnoldo. You have a fascinating history. Do you consider yourself Canadian first, Iranian first, or both equally? And if and when Iran is liberated in the future, would you return to live there?
Oh my God, great question. Great question, because that is actually the thesis of my documentary. My dream goes all the way to Iran, where we explore all of that. And so basically, somebody that I interviewed who was a war hero during the Iran-Iraq War and was saved by Kurdish rebels and then became an ambassador. And he was unfortunately then accused of being a spy by the Iranian regime, even though he was a hero. And then they imprisoned him and he escaped. Anyways, he lives in Vancouver, Canada right now. And I asked him that same question. And he described it so well. He said, being Iranian, being Canadian, it's like you have an elastic band. Sometimes you pull the elastic band and there's more on one side. Sometimes you pull it and there's more on the other side. So it kind of depends. Sometimes I'm a little bit more Iranian. Sometimes I'm a little bit more Canadian. But the thing is that to Canadians, I'm very Persian. And then to Iranians, I am so white. So it's like, I don't know. I'm a little bit of both. And sometimes I'm a little bit more this way. Sometimes I'm a little bit more that way. But I'm definitely have love for both. Would I move to Iran? You know, I would love to be part of the, you know, rebuilding and helping. But I don't know if, you know, I'm a mother, so it'd be difficult to, with a child to just up and move and leave. But, you know, it could be something that we could consider. I'm sure there would be international schools and things like that in a new and freer Iran, but I definitely want to be part somehow of rebuilding the country. I know there's a lot of people that would definitely move back. A lot of people have mentioned, oh, they would wait till their kids were 17, 18 and in college type of thing to go back. But it definitely is a theme where a lot of people would at some point in time go back, or at some point have some sort of connection where they maybe live half the year there and half the year in another country where they're working.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This next question, I'm going to combine two. Can you tell us, Negar, what's going on with the Iranian Jewish community? Are they vocal? Are they close to some of these sites? What's going on with their experience here?
That's a great question because I wanted to actually do a story on that, and then I hesitated for their safety. I didn't do anything because the thing is that their phone lines are being monitored. Their phone lines are tapped, and they don't share information because they've survived, you know, thousands and thousands of years inside Iran. And if they start to kind of let go right now, that could really put their lives in jeopardy. And I mean, Jewish Iranians are just like they're Iranian. They're just like atheist Iranians, Shia Iranians, whatever, Sunni Iranians. It's all the same. And so they have the same issues in the sense of, you know, they have a life there and they don't want to, they're put their lives at risk at this point. And so it's very difficult to talk about because, again, for their safety, they don't talk freely. You know, even if I was to be able to get a hold of an Iranian Jewish person, they wouldn't speak freely to me for their own safety. But they experience just what any other Iranian would experience, but at a heightened level, because you do have that threat of, well, you're an Israeli spy, you know, you're working for the Mossad. That's a lot of people that have been executed recently who weren't of the Jewish faith were being accused of being Mossad agents. So they know that they shouldn't make phone calls to families in Israel because when they do, you know, that shows up. And there actually is a American Iranian Jewish person. He's a jeweler from New York who's in jail right now inside Iran because he traveled to Iran. This is before the war, and they kept him there and accused him of being a spy.
I will just chime in very shortly and say that there is a large Jewish Persian community in Israel.
Yes.
Let's give Negar one moment to breathe before we get to a couple more questions. And I just want to say, if you viewers like what you're seeing here, I want you to go to our website and take a look at the fellowships that we offer. Our premise is to understand Israel, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the Palestinians. We must understand the Middle East. We are currently recruiting for our next cohort for our fellowship, Voices from the Middle East about the Middle East. One expert of which is Negar. So join us to really engage deeply with Israel, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the Middle East. This fellowship is offered to students and young leaders between 18 and 30, high-achieving individuals with a desire to bridge divides. The fellowship takes place from October 2026 through April 2027 with Sunday Zoom sessions. weekly assignments that empower the young leaders and students to become ambassadors of change, culminating in a capstone weekend. There's plenty of information on our website, insidethemiddleeast.com. Also, you can scan this QR code to apply. So if you know anybody who's of university age or a young leader to gain the knowledge, the skills, and the tools to become ambassadors of change, this webinar is a little taste of what we've got going. So please, I would encourage you to inquire, to apply, and contact us with any questions. Okay? So let's get back to our questions in the Q&A. Negar, you spoke about people who are trying to leave the country. What type of obstacles are people experiencing in trying to leave?
Well, I mean, there's always obstacles because Iran is a police state. So, the borders are always being controlled. It's very difficult and it's very risky, but this is not a new phenomenon given what's happening. In fact, because there's so much going on in Iran right now for the regime, they might actually, in some ways, that might actually work to the advantage of people this is why they've brought in a lot of their proxy networks like Hash al-Shabi from Iraq, and they brought in fighters from Afghanistan as well to really try and control and check in on the population. But there are still ways that you're able to get out of the country. Again, there's always a risk, and that's not something new.
Thank you. Next question is from Bob Davis. We hear a lot about situations in Tehran, in the cities. How does it look for people in smaller towns and rural areas? Are these people interested in reform, or are they still solidly behind the current regime?
So that's a great question because I wanted to point out that reform is dead inside Iran. Nobody believes that you can reform a basically murderous child-killing regime. That concept is gone for everybody. And it's interesting about the rural communities because the protests happen in every single province. And a lot of the hardest hit communities happen to be the more conservative religious areas. And this is why this kind of attempted revolution, they call it the Lion and Sun, Shir Khorshid revolution, was so significant because it was hitting parts of society that were once thought to be the backbone of this regime, who were once helped bring about the Islamic Revolution, and they don't believe in this regime anymore. And their children are also being killed. So they want this regime gone.
Thank you. This from
would,
Stephen Glass.
If I could just chime in and say something about it in that regard. I mean, large areas of the small towns, the villages, the remote areas, Iran is a huge country, are actually facing significant environmental challenges that basically result in a significant collapse of the agricultural sector. So people are moving to the cities, and that results in yet another major, I would say, aftershock wave, sort of speaking. And so it's another significant aspect of the situation in Iran.
Thank you. Thanks, Avi, for that. Next question. How should the U.S. seek to resolve this war? If we're not seeing a tangible change in the government, as you've articulated, people are afraid and/or "quote unquote" numb. How should America go about to resolving this conflict?
Well, I mean, there's the economic war front that is definitely weakening the regime. And I think that there could be a lot of covert operations, that could be done as well in terms of really pulling along the string of the infighting and taking advantage of that. Because again, if this regime can collapse from within, that would lead to less bloodshed in the country. Because at the end of the day, a war is a war. Even with targeted strikes, there are innocent people that are going to be killed and have been killed. So I think that's one big thing. And also, there was talk at some point of having American military power in the air, of having Israeli drones in the air, and then kind of creating the conditions that would make it safe and comfortable for people to go out onto the streets. And that Israeli drones, for example, my understanding was from Israeli officials that I spoke to, would take out anyone within the regime that tries to kill an Iranian protester. And, we saw for a period of time that Israel was targeting Basij military checkpoints. And then we saw videos of, the Basij being pretty scared of any kind of drone, the noise of the coming from a drone, because what Iranians were doing, again, dark humor, they would actually play recordings from their balconies, from their cars, of the sound of a drone, and you could see the Basij military running, and then they would start laughing, and obviously without regime officials finding out, but that was something that the regime officials are quite scared of. So I think that stopped. And when you stop those types of targets, when you start threatening to wipe out a civilization, no matter what the actual meaning was, whatever, that's what he wrote, the president wrote on X. When you start targeting, infrastructure that people need, like bridges, for example, that's not going to help. So I think it's a matter of also changing the targets. A lot of Iranians joke and say that they miss the days of reading tweets about eliminated, because we haven't seen that in a long time too. And when you think about it, the only kind of political leadership that was really eliminated from Iran so far has been Khamenei and Larijani. So, I think that, again, if they start being more strategic with the targets again, that's also going to make a big difference. And anytime there's talks or negotiations, a lot of Iranians are worried that means you're going to make a deal with the people that kill Iranian people.
Thank you. This question is a bit of a follow-up. If the United States is unwilling or unable to continue in this conflict, how likely do you think it is that Israel would be willing to step in and lend aid to the Iranian people against the regime?
Well, that's also, I think, a good question for Avi. I'm interested to know what you think. But at the end of the day, Iran, or the Islamic Republic of Iran, is an existential threat to Israel. And had, I think, a lot of those Arab countries not helped with, intercepting missiles and things like that, the Iranian regime could have done a lot more damage. And from my understanding from my friends inside Israel is that, it was a very difficult time, and people were being killed, and there was a lot of damage still, even from this, wounded or weakened regime. So this is a real threat. And, even if they make a deal, even if the regime makes promises, at the end of the day, you can't change the face of the Islamic Republic of Iran, right? And if I'm an Israeli, for my own safety and my own well-being, and for the future of Israel and the Israeli people and Jewish people around the world, because don't forget that the Iranian regime has been targeting Jewish people around the world. There was an attack in London recently that's connected to this Hayyu group, which is an offset of the Iranian regime. Like they are a threat to people, not just inside Iran, but outside of Iran and outside of the region of the Middle East. And look at what they did to their neighbors. Look at what they did to countries like the UAE that they use for sanctions evasion, for example. They're unhinged, and that's a very dangerous situation. So if I'm Israel, my end game would be to get rid of this regime. Now, for the United States, maybe that's not the case. Maybe a lot of scholars that I've spoken with and analysts say that this is really about getting to China, for example, and that their end game is not really necessarily about Iran for the American administration. So, but yeah, I'm curious to know, Avi, what you think.
Well, Negar, first, I'll definitely, second what you said about the threat that the regime presents, not only to Israel, it presents to the whole region. We saw that for the last couple of decades, obviously right now in the war, when the regime attacked its Arab Gulf neighbors, including apparently today a recent attack that happened in the UAE. As from the Israeli perspective, I think that it will be accurate to say that the bottom line in the context of Israel is that, I will put it this way, in Israel, they would really like to see this regime collapse and disappear. I think that there is a growing understanding that in the end of the day, apparently it's not going to happen, at least not in the foreseeable future. And I think that across the board in Israel, I would say the understanding that is in the end of the day, that the Iranian people are the one that need, in the end of the day, to bring down that regime. Across the board, there is a totally consensus, as you said, Negar, that this regime definitely presents a significant challenge to the region, and particularly, of course, Israel. And by the way, in that regard, Israel is now engaged also in the Lebanese arena, fighting against the Hezbollah, which is a significant Iranian proxy. And the Iranian regime is trying to actually connect the two arenas, the Iranian arena and the Lebanese arena, in order to try to continue and to save Hezbollah. And if that's the case, that is a very terrible and disturbing scenario, because the continuation of the Hezbollah ruling Lebanon the way it does with its weapon basically means more and more challenges to the region. So the bottom line in Israel, I would say, regarding the regime, in a wishful thinking, I would say people would say, we wish this regime will collapse. There is this understanding. It's apparently not going to happen, at least not in the foreseeable future. And in the end of the day, it goes back one way or another to the story of the Iranian people themselves.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. This next question, I'm going to synthesize a few that are along the same lines, and I know you're going to like this one, Negar. What can concerned observers in the US, Israel, and elsewhere tangibly do to support the Iranian people?
I think, one of the biggest things right now that at least I'm hearing from people inside Iran is to have some sort of assurance, because they are scared, because they are thinking twice about protesting, that if there is some sort of way, again, where there would be air power, drones, something that would guarantee their safety, that would definitely help them to rise up again when the conditions are safe. Another one would be, I know that there was a petition going around in Canada that was quite successful, was to recognize the crown prince, the son of the deposed Shah, Reza Pahlavi, as a true transitional leader of the country. So I think that would also, once Western governments, if there's a meeting between Trump or something, start to recognize that, I think that would also help to give a lot of momentum to the people of Iran. And it would be a big blow to the Iranian regime not to be considered legitimate. I mean, right now we saw that I think one of the representatives from Norway traveling to Iran, I'm thinking, really? After the war, after the massacre, after they basically not only threatened, but attacked the whole region, you have Western representatives meeting with Iranian officials? What does that say to me? What does that say to the people of Iran? And this goes back to bringing the morale down and having them in this state of, living between two worlds, of not being able to go to their past, like we mentioned, and not being able to create this future that they want for themselves. So I think for Western governments to again, delegitimize this regime is going to be huge. There are efforts underway, I know, in Congress to help bring about internet freedom and for funding on that effort. I mean, that's a very tangible solution. People need their internet back. If there's ways for Elon Musk to help, or for rich investors to help on that front, these are all things that can be done right away to help the people of Iran. And also, I know that there are a lot of Iranian dissidents who are facing issues in the United States right now, for example, with the new kind of visa restrictions that are in place. So in order to help the people of Iran, we also need to be able to help the people in the diaspora so that they're not sent back, because there are a lot of students, for example. I spoke to one American or Iranian living in the US who's working on Parkinson's research, and they've had to actually stop doing the trial surgeries because without her, they can't do it. But she's not able to get her visa renewed because it says she was born in Iran for that reason. So now she doesn't even know what to do. So she might get deported back to Iran in that case, in this situation. So there are definitely things on a microcosm, whatever level that people can do in the West that would help the people of Iran, Iranians in general.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions. We've heard from Iran watchers that municipal infrastructure, like water supply, has been very neglected, and that it risks a catastrophic collapse. Could this be an impetus for another popular effort to overthrow the regime?
It could go either way, because if you're coming from a very weakened position, in some ways you're less likely to want to protest, right? When water scarcity becomes an issue, that's also affecting you and your daily life at a very personal level, not just the regime, because the regime and people who have money always find ways, right, to get tanks and things like that, for example. But the situation was so bad that a few months ago, Pezeshkian, the president of Iran, was considering moving the capital Tehran to the south so they could have better access to water. But I don't necessarily think that it would help if the people don't feel that the conditions are safe and in place for them to rise up, they're just going to make do and try and survive daily. Because in reality, if they rise up for water scarcity, what's the regime going to do? Based on January 8th and 9th, they'll just kill them.
Thanks, Negar. Next question. You spoke about how the voices of the Iranian people are not getting out. How do we get these perspectives out in more mainstream U.S. media and international media, rather than just these biased and uninformed narratives that seem to dominate? How do we change the narrative and get the voices of Iran out?
On an individual level, all I can say is just for everybody to kind of do their part, to not wait for things to change on a systemic level, because sometimes that doesn't happen. So do your part, post on social media. We can all be a voice, especially now with Instagram and TikTok and all these different avenues. There are ways to be able to share these stories. The problem is, in my view, is that I think that a lot of Western media needs to get over, they have this almost blinded, I don't know, obsession with hating Trump and hating Israel. So there's a lot of content that comes out that they feel that anything that's basically tied to those two countries, they paint everything in a negative view, which is wrong. And people need to be able to assess the facts. And journalism needs to go back to the basics, which is to be factual and not to have your own personal views or biases tied to it. But unfortunately, that's the state that we're in at this point in time. Like, for example, there was a motion to try and ban the Iranian regime officials. It was a few months ago at the UN, and I spoke to Hillel Newer from UN Watch on that. And the one thing Hillel told me was that because he had come forth with this proposition, people just automatically said no, because they said, okay, well, he is favorable towards Israel, therefore we're just going to vote no on this motion. So it's ridiculous. What can I say? And I don't think people are going to change so easily. So I just encourage people on an individual level to do something, and maybe to write to your local newspapers and start at a very kind of local level to try and cover that news.
Thank you for that. I want to, at this point, end the Q&A session for this particular briefing room. Now, Negar, there's a lot of questions about you, and I'm wondering, aside from Iran International and the Eye for Iran podcast, how do our listeners, where can they look to hear more from you?
Oh, you can definitely, you can put up my my email. I'm happy to connect with anyone. I can type in my email here, and if anyone has any questions, or if I can direct anyone to any other sources and things like that, I'm more than happy to do that and stay in touch. I'll just type it in the webinar chat here.
Thank you so much, Negar.
Of course.
Avi, Negar, a good friend of mine always said, leave everybody with a little hope. Do you have any final words of positivity to bring to our audience today?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I still believe that there's going to be change, right? And I do think this regime is going to go, and they're going to be like a blip in Iran's history. I mean, 48 years of this theocratic authoritarian regime they got nothing on a nation state that's millennia old. Iran has been around for centuries, and Iran will continue to be around for centuries. And it's always been a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, cosmopolitan nation, and it will continue to be. Even with all these restrictions, even with the Iran-Iraq war, everything that's been happening since 1979, Iran's actually been, and the Iranian people have done pretty well for themselves. Just imagine if they didn't have this brutal, repressive regime that's controlling every aspect of their lives, how great a nation state it could be, and it will be. And I do have faith that this is just a dark chapter in Iran's history. Iranians have been through something similar-ish in the past, and at one point in time, and things will change, and there will be brighter days, because there is that fire still inside the people of Iran, and it will come from the Iranian people, like Avi said, and it will also come from the world, because the world will realize that you cannot deal with these mullahs, that you cannot have this system in place, because it's a threat to everybody, really.
Thank you for that, Negar. Avi, final words?
Yes, I will just say, in my many briefings, particularly the last couple of months with the war going on, asked about what's to look ahead. I'm always saying to people, look, this is a very significant, tectonic plate movement, sort of speaking, and we are just now in the very preliminary phase of the aftershock waves. We should wait for many aftershock waves to come down the road. And I think that we definitely need the perspective of time to see how things will evolve. And so I think it's very significant to bring that perspective into the picture. Anyhow, I would like at this point, yet again, to thank our special guest, Negar Mojtahedi. Thank you for sharing with us these unique perspectives, the voices from inside Iran, the voices of the people of Iran. And I want to thank you, the participants, for your patience and participating in ITME briefing room session. We will, of course, send out information about the upcoming session of the briefing room. And until then, I would like to wish you all stay well and goodbye.
Thank you so much. Our next session of the briefing room, June 14th at 12 p.m. Eastern. Topic and guest to be determined, as the Middle East is always changing. If you love our work, please go to our website, insidethemiddleeast.com. Feel free to take a picture of this QR code so you can support our work and donate. Please always pay attention to our partners. Negar, our experts, find them and seek out their voices. This podcast really is made possible by supporters like you. Our fellowship is made possible by supporters like you. So encourage those who are of university age and young leaders in the community to join. Please donate and join us on Sunday, June 14th. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Negar. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Oh, likewise. I had a great time. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you kindly. Be well.
You too. Bye.
Bye.